I think everybody's arriving in. Lovely to have you all here. Thanks for joining us. I'm delighted that you're able to join us this morning. I'm just sorting out my desktop as per usual. I'm not in my own office at the home desk, which is terrible. I was just saying to Kate, so there's no pips, which she's very, very mad about, but hopefully will forgive me at some point. But hi everyone. I'm really glad that you're here. I would really love you to I think, and Kate, please share yours as well too. As it's award season, I've been asking people this week, if you were to be nominated for an Oscar, what Oscar would it be for and why? And please share that in the chat, or else, Kate, whilst I sort of sort my screen top out, what Oscar would you be nominated for?
Oh, probably the best mum dancing. Is that a category? No, but the
It
best
should
mum
be.
dancing and use of disco. I mean, you just can't have too much disco in your life. So yeah,
No, you
it's got to
can't. I
be.
mean, that's just a given, right? You can't have too much disco as well.
Yeah.
Well, I'd just like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting today. Here, I'm in Brisbane, Meanjin, and I'd also like to pay my respects to elders past and present. Today's conversation is one that I've been looking forward to because we're talking about leadership as it's actually lived. A lot of it's been over time, not to age you, Kate, but you were there 16 years as CEO of the Teenage Cancer Trust, a huge charity in the UK as well. But you've obviously sort of stepped through that leadership space in terms of growth, pressure, doubt, transition, change upon change. My gosh, even a pandemic, let's not forget that in there as well as something to have navigated our way through. And there's a lot of leadership research that consistently tells us that effective leadership isn't about necessarily doing stuff isn't about doing more, but it's about judgment, it's about focus, it's about navigating complexity, but staying anchored in purpose. And that's never more apparent than whenever you sit in a leadership space within the nonprofit sector as well. So we're going to get into that. And there's no better person to talk to this about other than the wonderful Kate Collins, who has joined me today. Kate, I'm not going to go into bios, as I've always said, and I was just teasing with Kate. No bios, no websites, no nothing, but all of that will be shared after. So you can check Kate's new Substack out as well too, where she's blogging away to your heart's content about leadership, especially as she stepped down as CEO. So I'm really glad that you're here, Kate. Thanks for joining me.
My pleasure, and lovely to have people join and want to listen. What a privilege that is.
Yeah, it really, really is. I'm really glad that people were able to make it and sit in with us now. So I'd love to really start at a big picture level, Kate, because leadership is one of those things that we often understand differently once you've lived it for a while. And naturally, having a leadership position of 16 years, when you look back over your time as CEO, how has your understanding of leadership evolved, especially as you've navigated like growth, crises, and organizational change, and even having that sort of fundraising mindset as a CEO as well?
Yeah, so I think so. My I was with Teenage Cancer Trust for 16 years, and the last eight of those there as chief exec, and was kind of, as you said, in like senior fundraising roles in the organisation before, and then in other organisations before that. So it's like it is a 25, possibly 30-year story of leadership, well, certainly of working, and having different levels of seniority, different levels of challenge, and I would say that certainly the chief executive role is definitely where the thinking about leadership was definitely the most tested. And but the raw material that you bring in is like it all layers on itself. So it doesn't kind of, well, nobody ever gave me a golden handbook. There was no kind of like, oh, here are all the answers, because you haven't got those answers. So if I look back in kind of chunks, I think there's probably three phases of leadership, and the first bit I would call quite scaffolded, when you're relying quite heavily on either trying to replicate leaders you've seen and you thought, I loved how they did that, or sometimes it's leaders you've seen do things and you think, well, I'm never going to do it
I'm
like
gonna
that.
do that.
But often there's a bit more of that than sometimes the flattering approach. But also frameworks and theories and practice. So you scaffold yourself with, how am I going to anchor myself in how to do this thing called leadership, which I don't,
Mm,
is like, it feels quite nebulous. So you're quite scaffolded, I think, for that kind of first wave of learning to lead. And then you kind of get your own rhythm and your own kind of practice. And then I think, and certainly this came through much more heavily for me in the latter part of my leadership, certainly as a chief exec, about having a real don't want to sound too grandiose, but like actually more of an owned philosophy about
Yeah.
how I do this rather than how the books say to do this, rather than how I've kind of practiced doing this. It starts to become something that is much more your way of doing things, your way of leading, much more true to you because you're confident to do that as you are rather than as you think you should be. So I
Yeah.
think it doesn't I don't think I never ever got easier for me. It never demanded less of me. It just demands different things, I think, at different
Mhm.
times, leadership. And I think because I came up through that fundraising, marketing, engagement kind of path. That's the flavor of my
Yeah.
career before chief execing. Um, and I do call it chief execing. I definitely think it's a verb. It's not a title and the noun. You have to do it. You have to really practice it again and again and again because it's not like leading and being a chief exec, definitely you don't perform it. It's not theatre. You're not playing a part. You have to
Yeah.
be it. You have to be kind of all in it when you do it. So, and I think that because my fundraising background is very heavily in relationship fundraising, I think that
Mm.
plays through very, very, hopefully, very clearly in how I lead and the people that I have the joy to work with as a leader.
Were there any assumptions that you had early on that changed over time in terms of leadership?
Oh, probably. I just can't early on so long ago, David. I think um,
I mean, it's just showing up half the time, but even just like what surprised you about actually having the role that you thought, oh yeah, I'm not like management or exec anymore. They're looking to me for an answer. Hang on a
yeah.
second. Let me gather my
Yeah, I
thoughts.
think, I mean, there was definitely, because I was promoted internally into the role through a really chunky recruitment process, but I certainly remember like I'd been, in my view, like quite a good kind of cross-organizational director of fundraising and marketing. I didn't just sit in my bit and kind of fight my corner. I'd
Mm.
got a good understanding of the other parts of the organization. So I was quite kind of free range. I was quite an enterprise mindset leader. I'd like to think about the whole organization. So I thought, well, I'll just need to do that as the chief
Mm.
exec. And I was incredibly surprised by just how different the view is when you're actually sitting in the chief exec seat than the one you think it's going to be. And I think that is that real difference between kind of going, yeah, I know how to do that. I know how I think that person should be doing that. It's my son is a very talented football goalkeeper, and that's quite like being a chief exec because everybody knows what you should be doing. Everyone's got
Yeah.
an opinion how you should be doing it. Nobody else has got that job on the pitch, and you're everything that you do. Like if you do it well, that's just your job, and if you make a mistake, it costs a lot. So so for a goalkeeper, a mistake is a goal. It can lose you the match, and
That's
I
a
think
really good analogy. That must
that's
be
the
for
real
some fun conversations when your son comes to you.
well, yeah, but yeah, I spend a lot of time on football sidelines, so I have to get my football.
And get the game plan on.
Yeah.
One thing that comes up again and again in leadership conversations, and even last year, I think it was, I did a poll on LinkedIn, and I was just overwhelmed by the response back, talking about doubt, that confidence and doubt often coexist as leaders, and many experienced leaders say that the imposter phenomenon doesn't disappear with them; it just evolves over time as well. Has self doubt and imposter syndrome been part of your leadership journey, and how have you learned to live alongside it? I know I've called mine my name at some points that I know that they are over there, but like how do you live alongside of it without it letting it limit your decision making in some ways? Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, God, I mean, self-doubt massively. Like, and like and still. So it's kind of always there. I hadn't thought about giving it a name. I'll have a think on that, David. But certainly I quite acutely remember, certainly my first year as chief executive, people would, you'd arrive in a room like at an event or those sorts of things. Someone would say, oh, and here's our chief executive. And I would genuinely I have to stop myself looking over my shoulder for an adult, just be like, oh, there must be a grown-up coming soon. There must be somebody who's
Simon, are
very,
you there?
oh, where's the big chief executive coming in here? And I would use, I mean, I love to use humor to build connection, but I'd catch myself being too self-deprecating and almost not quite comfortable with that. And I had to think, you really got to pack that in because actually people are looking to you to not do that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think there's definitely self-doubt. And I think I don't know, I think sometimes if a leader doesn't have a bit of self-doubt, then you're probably tipping into a very different territory. If
Yeah.
you are
I,
absolutely categoric that you know something, you probably don't, and I'm a little bit worried about you. So
yeah.
it can be quite healthy. I think the thing for me, certainly in terms of imposter syndrome, I think sometimes puts the responsibility for that feeling all on the person who's feeling it. And I think imposter syndrome, even calling it a syndrome,
I know.
um,
I mean, yeah.
like
There's
actually it's often
10,000 theories why it's not a syndrome. It's a
but
phenomenon. I
you
mean,
know,
that's what the two women professors
yeah,
that sort of
definitely.
set that assessment called it a
It's a
phenomenon because it was mostly in females as well, female law students. Your gender as well too. I mean, there's been a recent PhD student who I think is joining us. Jennifer is on the line today as well too, but who completed a lot of research around female CEOs. Did that bring a lens of anything in there as well too, in terms of that doubt, or indeed just actual leadership as well?
yeah, I think certainly, there's lots of so I think the thing about, an imposter phenomenon and imposter syndrome, often that's pointing to something that's more systemic than you. It's telling
Mm,
you that the space that you're in wasn't necessarily designed for you. It doesn't mean you shouldn't be there.
mm,
And self-doubt is different to that. So I think sometimes that imposter syndrome is telling you that actually there are other things that might need a bit of work around
mm,
here for you to feel more
mm,
comfortable and like you
mm.
belong. But certainly, I've David, you and I've known each other a good chunk of time now. I'm quite straight talking. I know what I like. I know what I don't like. I have a view. And
Yeah,
you say, oh, Kate's a bit feisty. You get the kind of, oh, she's a bit bossy. I was definitely the young girl who was told, you are bossy. But it's that kind of, no, I'm not bossy, but I'm the boss. And actually have sitting in that place of like hierarchical authority where fundamentally you
mm,
do have to take accountability for what happens. Doesn't mean you have to behave awfully. Let's not behave awfully. Let's behave like nice human beings to each other. But you do
exactly.
kind of get the balance right. And I'm sure that, I was once told, the problem with you, Kate, always a lovely way to start any
Start a
feedback.
sentence.
Um,
Yeah,
the problem with you is you're too much of a northern girl, clear kind of there's loads of stuff loaded up in that about what and that was about why they didn't think I would make a good leader. And
yeah. I think
I
I
felt
often,
a
I
real
mean,
girl.
like yourself, it's the humor, but that's what attracts people to you as well too. I mean, even just knowing you and seeing, how you engaged visibly on socials. Now we're going to come to that later, but just that was that immediate bit of going, oh yeah, this is just someone that you're going to get along with. So people almost, even in your leadership team, they would look to you for that in some ways. And I think when you're talking about the doubt, it comes in all of us. But when you are hiring and recruiting your team, I see them as my counsel because they're the ones that that you get to step back and go, what are we missing? What do we need to see going
Yeah,
forward? Because you don't have all of the answers, and you shouldn't have all of the answers. That's why it's called
no,
that team one, and be encouraged by healthy conflict and healthy debate in those meetings. But ultimately, you still, you're as CEO. And then you got to make that decision. You got to make that call, and that's tough decisions, that start to get made. Those tough decisions, though, often can be navigating growth and constraint at the same time, which is
yeah.
something that we all experience only too well in the nonprofit sector. Balancing that mission ambition and financial reality. So you've led a lot of strategy resets, major developments, and tough financial questions. How do you approach those high stake moments where the stakes feel really, really real?
Oh, well, the stakes are always measured in either the lives of the people it will impact in terms of the work of the organization, and also the lives of the people it will impact in terms of the people who work within the organization. So
Mm,
I'm always measuring that through an incredibly kind of human lens. But I think those tough stakes decisions, a probably don't ever take them totally and utterly on your own.
Mm.
You know you are holding the ultimate accountability for those decisions. But if as a chief exec I was sitting there going, right, I will make the following decisions. Here is my list of decisions this week that I'm going to make. I think I would be a terrible chief executive if I was just doing that,
Mm.
saying these are mine to take. But I think the thing that I've learned, and most of the things I've learned, I would say I've learned by often not getting them right first time,
Mm.
is I think the difficulty is a tough decision is it's not always the decision, it's the gap between like what you can see as the person with the most context, that change of perspective on the organization. It was when I became a chief executive, it was like everything was in widescreen. I was like, whoa,
Mm.
okay, I've got this whole view now, nobody else has got this view. And also I'd got a view of our kind of partners and collaborators in the sector, as well as the views of kind of at Teenage Cancer Trust, the needs of young people. And you've probably got the most context, you've got the most
Mm.
information, and the gap is why that matters and which bits of that you are pulling together to go, yeah, and I think directionally, this is the call we're going to need to make. And actually, I think we need to make that sort of call now so that in 12, 18 months' time, the stuff that I can see coming or we can see coming is stuff that we are readier for. Now we couldn't always do that. You
Yeah.
know, we talked about the pandemic.
Mm.
But like in the pandemic, Teenage Cancer Trust in the UK, I know lots of our listeners are in Australia, but we had a scheme called furlough where you could kind of put people on 80% of their pay and the government topped the pay up, and they didn't work.
Yeah.
And we furloughed 60% of the organisation, and we took those decisions. We had to take them quickly in order because our income, like everybody's, was kind of just stopped, like
Mm.
like absolutely off a cliff. Um, and those were incredibly tough decisions. And I can still remember a month before the pandemic, we'd actually relaunched our organisational values to the
Oh,
organisation.
wow. Yeah. Right.
And we'd shaped them with young people and staff in like the 6 months previously, and we'd actually codified them. We'd never had values actually written down. We always knew our purpose, but you'd probably get a slightly different version of it from everybody. And so we'd actually done it and we'd launched them. And I can remember in that it was a team session, kind of furloughing a huge amount of colleagues. Somebody just put in the chat, yeah, Kate, you know, spirited, united, determined, kind, young people at the centre. You're clearly living the values. This is not easy, but you know, we know why you're doing it. You know, that was one of those meetings where you think, I really wish I wasn't reading the chat because I'm going to go. They don't need to see me cry in this moment. But I think that was in part we'd really anchored on our
Mm.
values. But other tough decisions, so in 2023, we faced really, really significant financial challenges in the cost of living crisis in the UK. Um,
Mm.
that wasn't, I think the context in the pandemic was much clearer to people.
Mm.
People knew they'd got an almost synchronous, everyone had quite a different experience, but lots of the same events were happening at the same time. It
Mm.
was actually quite not quite a universal experience. I've not quite got all my words in the right order this evening, David.
Yeah.
Um,
No, no, no. Gosh,
but
it was
I
later
think
there.
there's something really about making sure you're giving people the context so people can a bit like doing your maths homework at school, people can see your workings, they can see how you've got to the conclusions you've got to. And I think that's one
Mm.
of the big things for me in terms of those tough decisions, that where
Mm.
I've made those tough decisions and people have come with and understood it is because they've had the right amount of context, either from the events that were happening and or from me as the chief exec. And where I've made those tough decisions and they haven't landed as I'd anticipated, that's often because I've not done my job well enough to give that context enough to
Right.
people. That's
Yeah.
on me as a leader,
Yeah.
not on the people who are not happy.
And when you talk about, you said something there about not carrying that responsibility on your own. Is that something, is there something there in terms of your relationship with your board and your chair or your immediate exec? Like which bit of that were you not carrying alone and which bit of it would you share openly with your exec team and also lean on your chair for some of that, you know, I don't mean just in pandemic. I mean in general when you're thinking about trade-offs and change and organizational change, because ultimately in the nonprofit, I mean we've all had to do it, unfortunately, to make people redundant at some point, for example, or change a service that you know is going to, you know, either reduce to grow, but in your mind's eye it's going to grow in coming years because this is a new thing that we're doing, but you still have to sit with those decisions and think about them. So, you know, again, just yeah, that carrying it alone aspect. Can you unpack that a little and sort of what or who you relied on in those moments?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. My chair in particular, I've had two chairs as chief exec of Teenage Cancer Trust, both really different, both brilliant for what I and the organisation needed at the time
Mm,
that they were chair, and I have been fortunate to have incredibly good relationships with both of them. In my new kind of consulting entity, I signed my client last week, so I text my former chair. I was like, I know I don't really need to tell you exciting things anymore. I haven't quite recalibrated who my people are for exciting news. And he was just sending me lots of heart emojis. So that's kind of where our relationship is.
very
He was
good,
very
very
good.
good.
He was like, Kate clearly needs me to be excited. But in terms of those tough decisions, I think it's there's a point with those decisions where they are ultimately yours as the chief exec to take a call on.
Mm,
And it's about being really clear with whoever you're using as a sounding board that you're using them as a sounding board. So I
mm,
would talk to my chair and say, look, this is where I'm at. I'm feeling stuck with this. Can you help me kick this around a bit? You know, he would say, do you want to noodle on this? And when we work it out and we'd kick it around, and he wouldn't tell me what he thought, because he knew I needed to get there and he needed to be part of my processing to get there. And
nice.
similarly with my team, you know, I would be like, right, actually, I just really want to hear your view. Doesn't mean it's what we're going to do, but I really want to hear your view, and I'm particularly keen to hear what you're really worried about,
Mm,
because that gave me context. It didn't then mean I needed to dilute a decision or water it down, same thing, but it was about being able to go, right, I've thought about these viewpoints. This is where I've made a call. And
mm,
being able to say to people, I know this is what you're worried about. Um, these are the things I've weighed up. This is why I've chosen to go left rather than right, or whatever the choice was. And I think those are the things, trying to work out loud as much as possible with people so they can see
mm.
your workings. It's not always possible, but on the tough decisions, um, and also on some decisions you can go, I think I've got that wrong.
Hmm.
I think I've
Well,
made the wrong.
we're going to come to the wrong part, I think, in a bit.
Yeah,
So yeah, hold that thought for a second. But I think, I mean, again, one of the I think I mentioned before, and equally, it's how we met back in the good old Twitter days, you know. But a dimension of it still makes me laugh because I use that photograph obviously in the promotion of this conversation. But yeah, that you know the trafficker of Percy pigs that you were for me, but the fact that you had to tell your husband. I know if the anyway, you know, they're here now anyway, so we can move on from that. But it did make me laugh that you had to tell your husband you were off to buy Tupperware containers for a man you met on the internet. Ta-da! That was me. And yeah, but I mean, like one of the dimensions that's there for leadership is that visibility. It's increasingly expected. When we sit, you know, in a time where many describe it as the attention economy, to communicate, to engage, and be seen as well as heard. There are a lot of organizations. I mean, every nonprofit has every social media aspect is there within the nonprofit sector as well. But a lot of research has really, and even just a recent article I think that was Michelle Flores Lynn was publishing, was the lack of CEOs that actually engage in that space or that are not active or visible through social media, for example. But you know, to me, it sort of describes that visibility as no longer optional. But it comes with expectations and it comes with the pressures that are there. So for you, you've long been a visible leader. It's been one of the admirable qualities I've often felt of your voice in the sector. And you got me into, and I'm prompt, but you got me into Damien's book at that stage all of those
yeah,
years ago. And I messaged Damien about it as well. And here in Australia, Jan Owen, who's another really respected voice publicly talking about issues in Australia terms as well, who has a chapter in the book, as many other different CEOs do as well. But When you think about the role of the CEO's voice today, particularly balancing that authenticity, responsibility, and the reality that visibility can both build trust and add pressure, how do you think that, what do you think that, why is that important for a CEO to be doing that? And did your relationship with visibility change over time?
Yeah, I think so I think it's the job is to be visible. Like
Mm,
actually that is that's a huge part of the role, because it's in those small things that build trust and credibility. That somebody much
mm,
wiser than me once said that, trust is built in droplets and lost in bucket loads.
mm,
And and actually, if you are on social media as a leader and you are just doing it to make people like you and make people trust you, and that, like, people can see through that. So you have to be
mm,
there as yourself. And I think visibility has probably meant different things to me at different times in my career, but certainly as a chief exec, it was really important to me to have my voice within the kind of the more corporate message.
mm.
And I'm very lucky to be married to a man who makes me laugh all the time and would play pranks on me. So, I would come home and there would be ridiculous notes around the house and all sorts of stuff. I had plenty of content, David. Really put it there. I had plenty of content. So, and actually,
Yes, and that
being
bloody
able,
train ride down to London.
lucky me. But just being able to kind of, like, apparently he keeps me grounded by taking the proverbial, but being to kind of actually just laugh at myself a bit, have
Yeah.
that kind of connection and humor. There was one day where I genuinely showed up at the office and looked down and was like, oh, good, I've got one black boot and one blue boot on. They were the same boots I brought, and I helpfully took a picture of those and tweeted it, and then it became actually a feature in Young People Now magazine that the chief exec of Teenage Cancer Trust was wearing odd boots to work. I was like, not totally sure that was the media coverage we were aiming for. My comms team were like, Kate,
And
but
what are you
but
doing?
it was. So I think for me, I am quite a playful, energetic
Yeah.
person. There is also a real boundary about like, how do we behave?
Yeah, and
And
how do
it
you decide what is
post
your
like,
voice and what's the organization's voice?
yeah, very, very much. And I think that's been something that I've found really interesting. Now I'm out on my own doing my consulting practice, because actually there are things I can say now that I wouldn't have thought about saying before.
Mm,
I wrote a blog piece about legacy and my reflections on legacy and leaders' roles being about being able to step away at the right time. That's not a piece you can write when you're in a role. Like,
yeah,
that's a new view for me, but it
yeah.
would be very loaded, and people would be kind of going, I think Kate's hinting at somebody needs to go, or she's gonna go. But you can't write that in that way.
Yeah,
So you 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 have to still be able to sound like yourself. But if you're just kind of purely sharing kind of things on socials that are just kind of rehashes of the corporate tweet or the corporate LinkedIn post, it's not
yeah.
very engaging, because the whole
No,
point
it's
is to
not.
engage. Like, I'm from a relationship fundraising background. I
Yeah,
really like people.
yeah,
So social media channels were purely a way for me. I was like, there's lovely people here to talk to and joke with and learn from. I learned so much, particularly in those early days of Twitter.
yeah.
Twitter changed a lot over that
It did.
period,
Yeah,
and
it
it
did.
became really toxic and unpleasant. And now I find
It,
myself trying to play on LinkedIn. It's not quite as playful, I must say.
no, I mean it's changing as a space as well, but it's one of those things that excuse me, clear the throat. I haven't done my vocal cords really this morning then, have you yet? It's one of those things of like sociological Goffman's talked about the front stage, backstage kind of thing when you're public, private self as well. But where do you balance that with authenticity? And I think that that's one of the things that over the years of knowing you and engaging with you, it's always been there. One minute you can be doing the colored boots, as you say, but the next minute you'd be calling out the lack of it seems a trite point, but just like in your capacity as the CEO, you'd be calling out something to do with the inequality of access
Yeah.
for adolescents and young adults, experiencing cancer. So there's a healthy balance that's in there going, yeah, this seems like a rounded person that's visually being presented to us that can be that, but also has the authority voice that's in there as well. Excuse me. Gosh, massive clear of throat as well. I think the organization itself, Teenage Cancer Trust, has always sort of has really stood out as a brand and as a cause, and
Yeah.
and brings lots of integrity. I mean, having worked here in Canteen, which was sort of bringing us back to where we initially met, it was it's a wonderful, wonderful space to be in. But the sort of bells and whistles on Teenage Cancer Trust, not really bells and whistles. It was a rock concert and everything else. Um, it's often been sort of based around some of that celebrity partnerships. I mean, it was thingy from the Who that set it up,
Roger.
essentially. Yeah,
Yeah.
Roger Daltrey, and then sort of it ranged from there. But when it has that long association with high-profile supporters, with events like the Royal Albert Hall, and I know I've mentioned that I've been to a few of the gigs. It was always a good fun event to go to. From your experience, they can often drive, or a celebrated individual can often drive awareness. But it can also bring questions of alignment and authenticity, and sometimes reputational risk. We've all been there and seen the news of different things where you've brought someone on, and the next minute they're on the tabloids about something else. From your experience though, with that sort of power of celebrity, how do you navigate that balance between that power of the actual celebrity and being staying anchored in purpose and integrity?
Yeah, I think I'm astonishingly lucky in this space in particular because my first charity job was at BBC Children in Need, a huge appeal, and of course, the astonishing Sir Terry Wogan led that with enormous conviction over time, not just the appeal nights, but all the days and weeks in between, and kind of energized his whole community of listeners to his radio program to support very, very similar in lots of ways to Sir Roger Daltrey, both knighted, to Sir Roger Daltrey, who did the kind of first gig for Teenage Cancer Trust, a one-off gig in the year 2000, and then ended up curating a week of gigs at the Royal Albert Hall for 25 years. I think we possibly pushed our luck on the definition of one-off as an organisation then. So I think for both of those two, like Sir Terry Wogan and Sir Roger Daltrey, like they absolutely deep in their souls believed in the work of those
Mm,
organizations. So hugely grounded in post because they were so rooted in actually what's really happening here,
mm,
and that, like, we can't expect that from everybody. There are only a few of those people
mm,
who ever are able to bring together their phenomenal, like, pulling power and attention and their networks and everything that they
mm,
bring. So I absolutely agree. It's about managing the power in the room, and the risk around that power. And often
mm.
the risk isn't necessarily always the high profile person. These are individuals with teams around them, and actually how
Yeah,
does that
right.
team operate, how do they kind of behave, and actually, quite frankly, do they trust you as an organization? Because the risk goes both ways. If you're a celebrity, if you're high profile and you're getting involved in something,
Mm,
they really want to do the due diligence on the organization as well, because what they don't want is something that means that they're in the headlines for the way in which you work, or that actually you're just going to be really, really uncool about how famous they are and absolutely lose it, and
yeah,
just kind of just totally fangirl. So they need to know you can kind of basically hold it together,
yeah.
in order to balance it. I don't think there's a binary. I don't think there are. You don't get many Sir Terry Wogans. You don't get many Sir Roger Daltreys. I've been very, very lucky in my career to have that role modelled for me twice through two remarkable
Mm,
people who brought so much. But I think the other thing about power, and I learned this by seeing it play out. And Teenage Cancer Trust is very, very, very cognizant of this and mindful of this, is the power dynamic. If you take someone who's high profile to a hospital to
mm,
visit young people who are at their most vulnerable, and they are
mm,
then, that young person is then meeting somebody that they're a fan of,
mm,
that power, safeguarding that young person's experience, is absolutely paramount.
mm, mm,
That is something, and I think making sure, and we used to do lots of work kind of behind the scenes with
mm,
high profile people and their teams, kind of going, this isn't a meet and greet. This is
mm,
not a meet and greet. Like, I know that you do meet and greets all the time. It's part of what they do, but this is really, really different. These young people you're going to meet they're really, some of them very unwell, and actually this is the most amazing thing that's happened, that you're here. And we've got to be really careful and mindful about how we navigate
Yeah.
that for them. And I think doing all you can to, like, don't ever duck that conversation. I remember the first time I was having that conversation with someone, and I won't name them because it would be
No.
inappropriate, but really high profile person, and they were kind of a bit taken aback, and I thought, well, I'm doing my role here. This is my responsibility to the young people and parents that you're about to meet. These people are in a point of enormous stress, and I need to actually make sure you know how to handle this well,
Yeah.
for them. Never mind for you. I don't. How famous you are is not of note to me at that point in that conversation. That's all about the young people and families, and often the nurses that they're going to meet.
Mm.
Nurses did love a selfie when we did a famous person doing a unit ward
I
visit.
can only imagine. I mean, the power of celebrity is definitely something, but it's the first thing that can often, and if a charity experiences its own crisis or has a something, a scandal that hits it, when the celebrity starts stepping away from it, it becomes a whole bit of real, press fodder, and there's a lot of it just gets a lot of coverage as well too. When do you say no? Like if somebody steps forward and says, I want to advocate for you, is that something that's come up or that you've observed, not necessarily in Teenage Cancer Trust, but just that you've observed that we've just taken a stand and gone, you know what, there isn't an alignment here. I mean, it's much like any other partnership that you can get to a point and step back and go, actually, I don't think we're aligned.
Yeah, and and there is also nothing wrong with doing a partnership that is actually, you'll bring PR, we'll get attention for the thing we need to talk about, that is actually quite a straightforward exchange. Like, those
Mm,
are okay. So I think for where I've seen stepping back is just not being able to find that fit, and being able to often have that conversation with the person's team. You're not necessarily having that conversation with the celebrity, high profile individual themselves at that point. It's like
mm,
often, like, we would be working with their team, trying to find a fit, trying to work out how we made this work well for both. And like, people know when it's not gonna, you know when
mm,
there's not really the traction there. You know if it
mm.
doesn't feel right and sit right. And for me, as chief exec, I always wanted to make sure that the team knew that they didn't have to say yes to anything they weren't comfortable with or didn't sit right. You have to be able to have a culture in an organization where you
Mm.
are able to kind of go, is this just jangling for anyone? Does it not
Yeah,
quite
right.
like,
And that's that thing, like culture shapes, it shows that culture is shaped less by strategy documents, right? And it's more about the leadership behavior around things as well,
yeah.
particularly when organizations are under pressure or, at any point of things, as well. But what have you learned? This is a big question, probably. What have you learned about keeping culture anchored to values when stakeholders, finances, and expectations are pulling you in different directions? Like, how does that show up for you? And have there been moments of governance and culture where they were both in tension, kind of thing? Can you elaborate on any aspects of that?
I think like culture is something, I think culture is something you always need to be working on. It's never done. It's
Mm.
never fixed and done. And like, there's a quote, isn't there? The culture eats strategy for
Actually, for
breakfast.
breakfast. Yeah.
And I actually
Ducker.
think I think you need both, and your culture needs to be in support of your strategy, and your
Mm.
strategy needs to be really tightly aligned to your culture, and that's how the rubber hits the road and you get stuff to change and you make progress. But I think one of the things I really learned about culture was, I think, when you really understand what your culture is when you're under pressure. And
Mm.
when you're under that pressure in an organization, that's where you understand where your culture actually is, opposed to what you as the senior leader think it is. And I think often the more senior you become, the less visible the real culture of your organization is to you, because all the
Mm.
things that give you authority, also distance you quite a lot from reality. And I think the job of leaders is to manage that distance, and to kind of make sure you are still, like, whether it's doing kind of service visits, whether it's out at fundraising events talking to supporters, whether it's kind of out seeing your team at work and going to see them and chat to them, Those
Yeah.
are things that are so easy to deprioritize when you're navigating a financial crisis or external pressures. And actually, we were so well served, thank goodness, by having done that work on codifying our values a month before the
Mm,
pandemic launched.
mm,
We didn't, I don't think, we weren't then as active about keeping those values as match fit and relevant and the behaviors around them. Like 3 years later, we faced another significant challenge. And I think I'd done a lot of assuming that it was people felt like they did about the values through the pandemic, that all the
yeah,
behaviors
right.
were still panning out. And actually there were bigger gaps there in places than I'd appreciated. And it was only the pressure that exposed them, which is the worst time to find out there's a gap.
Yeah, yeah.
So I would say that one of the things that I certainly learned was, I think, well, A, as a leader, you cast a really long shadow. Like there is no way, like if I walked to the office and it was raining and I arrive in the office and I'm like, oh, and I look like thunder because I'm just like drenched, people don't go, oh, Kate, but they might go, Kate looks wet and laugh at me, but they won't go, oh, Kate looks cross because she's obviously had a bit of a crummy journey. There's something where people go, the boss looks cross. What's going on? Even if they
Mm,
don't say that, you cast a long shadow as a leader. And that was one of the reasons that I didn't have an office at Teenage Cancer Trust. I sat out in kind of free range with people. I would pop up in different parts of the office and just sit and work. And when it was my
right.
turn to make a cup of tea, I was like, does anyone want a brew? That stuff is hugely important to me as a leader, because I think culture's often the bit in between, the small behaviors that you don't codify. And I think the more senior you are, the further away from reality you get. So you have to work really, really hard on managing that distance in
Mm.
a way that's authentic for you. Like you can't, if you're not someone who feels happy to wander around and chat to people, it will be really obvious because you look stuffed as you do it. But if you're really honest, everyone's like, oh God, they're coming this way. Please don't come and have an awkward chat with me. Like, it needs to work for you, but I think you have to find your way to build that connection and reality.
It is, and I've worked for people, leaders, we'll say, rather than titles, that are exactly that, where you just kind of think, I know that you're doing this because someone has said this seems like a good idea to do it back to floor, but it's really
It's
just almost,
excruciating.
it's almost heightening the impression that people have of you. So don't do it. Just find
Yeah,
another way. Find
yeah.
another way.
But I think,
You
like,
know?
you asked
And
me
they did.
about yeah, bless them. But you asked me about governance as well, and I think that one of the things that, through lots of the kind of challenges that you or come in any tenure of a chief exec
Mm,
and an organization, particularly as you say when there's a pandemic in the middle there. um like, our board of trustees were absolutely phenomenal. I mean, they, like, I could genuinely summon them on a sixpence at a weekend if I needed them, and I would get all 12 on a Zoom call like that. And they'd be like, what do you need? And they were all dealing with the pandemic in their personal and professional lives, as well as this voluntary supporting Teenage Cancer Trust role on the board. And
yeah.
likewise through the restructures we did in 2023. Um, that's all really invisible to the organization. And I
Yeah.
think I think I could have been a better internal PR for our board at times, because the level of commitment, drive, intensity, challenge, that's not a board of people who come and just nod stuff through and say yes because Kate and the team have said it, we agree with it. They will absolutely kick the tires of stuff, absolutely do their job.
Mm,
But
mm.
often their contribution, and it was hefty, was really invisible to the organization.
Yeah,
And
right.
I
That's
think there was
interesting, yeah, in
I think
itself.
I think
Yeah.
there was some really, there are things there where I definitely could have championed them more within the organization, because they did so much and do so much
Mm,
for, they're wholehearted in their support of the
mm.
organization. And I think, people don't kind of go, God, the board are really, really stepping in here because they're not visible. And then if you're then seeing through a restructure that people know the board
Mm.
have signed off, they almost become like a pantomime baddie for people. There's like, the board have done
Oh
this.
yeah,
And it's like, no, they really, like, the level of commitment and drive and seeing those values play out was something that, with everyone's a genius with hindsight, David. But
of course.
yeah, as I look at that, I think I could have probably done more visible championing of how they were leading.
Yeah, yeah. I think one of the things you touched on there about sort of a restructure and things like that, it's often leadership's often framed around success, and it's one of those things of even just starting in conversation that people don't talk enough about, is around that it does include loss. It
Yeah.
includes things where decisions don't land, where plans change and there are moments of disappointment. And we often don't talk about that side of leadership enough in some ways as well. And I think one of the things that I remember, and again, I'd moved from London at that stage, but I don't know, had I think, anyway, it doesn't matter, was the Pizza for Losers, which was it Emma that developed that? And then she just went on and on and on.
Nikki.
Nikki, right, just
Nikki.
went further and further and further. And I loved the whole concept of it. When I came to Australia, I sort of tried to kick the tires with a few people to see if we could get something like that up and running here. I mean, not in an executive leadership capacity, but just in a learning spot kind of thing. But I just love the whole concept. So have you ever experienced loss or disappointment in leadership, and what has helped you recover and keep moving forward when things haven't gone the way that you've hoped for? What stories were you sharing at Pizza for Losers evenings?
Loads. I mean, I think loads of the stuff you learn are the things that you get wrong. Like
Mm,
actually, it's a like leading is a real active craft, and you have to kind of find your own way of doing it, and that involves like learning through things not working as well as the things that do. But also like loss, there have been people who have worked their socks off for me and then actually then found themselves in roles in the organization, and the organization had grown beyond what they could then give. And
yeah.
and I'd been with, I spent 16 years at Teenage Cancer Trust. The biggest moments of loss have been where I've needed to sit down with a colleague and have that conversation that it's now time
Mm,
to move and to move
mm,
them. And that's not on them. They hadn't failed. These are fantastic people, but because, you know, the organization I was leading at the end was really different from the organization I inherited. Organizations
yeah.
do that. The world does that, and you have to
Mm,
keep the needs of young people changed. So those are losses, but it's more of a loss for the other person than for me. So
mm,
like part of leading is the emotional labor of leading, and the weight of the decisions that affect people's lives and livelihoods and their sense of
mm,
purpose and their identity. And like the more senior you become, that's a bigger weight to carry, and that's kind of the gig.
mm,
So
mm,
and actually that's like that's why you get paid more than everybody else.
mm.
Like, you know,
Why do you think the leaders don't talk about this enough? Like in terms of things, I mean, even just when you talk about the emotional labor there,
I
that's
think
something that you don't hear people, maybe in CEO rooms and forums they talk about it with fellow CEOs, but certainly, I
I
don't just
think
don't.
I think it risks. I think it can feel like the world's smallest violin, really, to be honest, because
Right,
it's that kind of thing. Look, as a chief exec, I'm like, well, I've got the biggest salary in this organization. That salary comes with the weight of this role. Like that's the gig. That's the value exchange that's going on here. And one of the things that massively surprised me in the best of ways was the instantaneous peer support from other chief execs, like when I was
right.
appointed. And those conversations absolutely happen in chief exec peer-to-peer groups.
Yeah, right.
But it's just not like appropriate to play that out. So I was delighted and surprised, and have had I mean, I'm still in a chief exec WhatsApp group. One of my peers there has had a really, really crummy thing happen. And genuinely, it's like people are like, right, we want a Teams call. Do you want this time tomorrow? Like, like this. I don't think the person who's had this thing happen wants to be on the Teams call, but there are now 8 chief executives who are like, right, when are we doing this then? And I'm like, just a sec. Hang on, everybody, breathe, breathe, breathe. I know we all like to swoop in and support. What do you need? But I think there's also
You need a hug
do you need us to shut up?
or
Like, do you
just a
need
boot
us?
in the ass?
You need 8 people who all have views, because chief execs all have views and we're used to giving them. Um, but I think there's something for me. like I'm a really resilient character. Like I'm really kind of
Mm,
constitutionally I'm resilient. I'm gritty and I actually, thrive when things are a bit tough. But there's a real difference, I think, between being resilient and just enduring. And there's
mm,
another piece of great advice I was given. Somebody said, we talk about leadership being like, like being a marathon. It's a marathon, not a sprint.
yep.
And they said, no, 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 it's not. It's like a series of high intensities, like hit workouts, where you have to have the downtime to recover between them, and you have to kind of think, where's the intensity and where's my breather, even if it's like an hour in the day of
Mm.
how am I going to, I say that like I run marathons or do hit workouts, if you know. But anyway, I understood the metaphor. But I
Yes.
think I think it is much more about planning that resilience piece for like, and how do I get my little bit of downtime? How rather than this is like an ultra marathon, I've just got to keep going because that just
Mm,
depletes you. Whereas resilience can be quite generative as long as you've got those recovery periods, even if they're little and short. And I think that's how I've navigated some of that loss because the loss is often bigger for the other person.
yeah, of course. Of course. Now, obviously, you're at a point now where you're stepping away from the role that you've had for many years. And that's one of the most profound leadership moments in itself, right? I mean, I haven't, admittedly, it's tagged and pinned because I've got a shit ton of reading to do at the weekend. But your Substack about the whole "it's not about you" part. But I'm curious, in that article, it's both, as they say, an ending and a beginning, and a door open in the next chapter, and everyone floods messages around that, going, "Good luck with the next chapter." But as you're stepping away from the role, like how does it feel to leave something that's been such a defining part of your identity as a leader? What do you want to carry forward? What do you want to let go of?
Yeah, I think so I think it has been such a defining role. I have had such an absolute blast at Teenage Cancer Trust. I was so lucky in 2009 to find myself in an organization that was where it was in its development was so aligned to where I was in mine, and
Mm,
what it needed next I could have a go at, and it's a symbiotic relationship. So I would say, although it's been defining because it shaped me,
mm,
it isn't me.
mm, mm.
And I think that real kind of difference between like what helps define you and shape you like isn't then the meaning of me. And I've really, started to understand that. And also, I was in a position where I had an in-house successor. It was like there's a moment here where I could
Mm,
and where I could go. I was like, I could go. And I
mm.
said to my chair, I would always love the moment I go to be sad. Obviously, I want a bit of fuss. Okay.
I
A
mean,
little
come on,
bit.
it's Oscar-winning performance. You're coming
Fine.
into
Yeah.
disco, but disco's sad music, it's
Yeah,
like
come
the
on,
last dance,
everyone in
the
dark
last
clothes. Yeah,
chance.
exactly. But I was like, I'd like it to be like sad, but I want it to actually be quite low drama. So
Yeah,
it shouldn't be disruptive for I mean, it is a disruption, a leadership transition, but and actually, I think my chair, who gave me some fantastic advice in that kind of piece I've written about, it's not about you. Like the moment people know you're going as a chief exec, like you're sort of gone. Like they kind of
yeah.
you always see them move on in the conversation. They kind of think,
We're
oh,
not going to you
cool.
anymore for this. You're going over there. So there's almost that
Because
breakdown of the whole, hang on a second, I'm still here.
because it's not about you. That's really healthy. It's really normal. It's really natural. I would have done it multiple times in my career to other people, not intentionally. Because you just think, okay, well, I'm going to need this decision made, and Kate won't be the person helping me live with the implications of that decision in 6 months' time. So who will
Mm,
be? Who do I need to go and talk to? Like,
yeah.
where am I invested? And like part of being a leader is getting out of the way. Um,
God, that's very
actually,
true. That's very
yeah,
true.
it
It's,
really
it's
is.
it's the one thing you try to remember each time as well, around things. But I think I'm going to bring us into a bit of a close at this stage, Kate. I mean, it's been always thoughtful and engaging having a conversation with you. But I I think there's something really powerful about hearing about leadership that's been about all of your honesty that you've shared, and not just the successes, but the realities of what it is, the learning and keeping the humanity visibly and everything else. There might be a few questions that I'm going to just click on the chat at where people get to ask you questions, hopefully. Or where is the it's Q&A. There's a few in here. Great. What do you think is a hard truth the charity sector is still not fully facing? Good question. Whoa.
Um,
I mean, in the UK, that report's just come out that showing cost of living crisis or cost of existing has really declined fundraising. But what do you think is the hard truth charity sector is still not facing, fully facing?
I think there are two that actually it's often doing the work that should be done by the state and
Mm,
is now caught in a trap of doing that because of commitment to need. And
mm,
is that our job? And I think fundamentally we are not equitable or representative of the people we exist to serve or the people
mm,
that actually would want to support us. And that has not made the progress it needs to make certainly in terms of action
mm.
in lots of UK charities.
There's a question here that I think you've already answered, so I'm just going to bump that one, but if you don't mind. There's another one here that is, what was it about you? What was it that you did, sorry, that made the trustees be so available, supportive, and challenging at the service of the organization?
Um, I don't know if it was what I did. We always centered on purpose and the work of the organisation. So, like even in trustee meetings, we would have a video at the start that was from a young person or one of our frontline NHS colleagues, nurse or youth worker. So, just keeping it as grounded in why we're all digging deep and kind of
Right.
showing up at silly o'clock on a Sunday to kind of run through a furlough plan or whatever it was. So, yeah, that would be. Yeah, it was
Lovely.
on them. It wasn't necessarily me, I don't think.
Thank you. There's lots of comments coming in about building relationships and doing good, and lots of thank yous there as well. Can I ask what forms of reporting or communication have helped you feel most connected to a charity's real work beyond metrics alone? Good question,
Oh,
Anna.
gosh, getting out there to talk to young people. So like
Mm,
actually getting out from behind a desk and going to talk to people and really just asking good questions and
mm,
listening like heck. I still remember some of the very first conversations I had with parents who were fundraising in memory of their son, who I never met, to support Teenage Cancer Trust, and some of the things that they said to me live with me now and drove me for 16 years. So
mm.
yeah, it depends on you and
Yeah,
depends on the background, but yeah, that's always been. I just felt so bloody fortunate to be able to be a
mm,
conduit for
do that.
what they were trying to achieve. Yeah, it was amazing.
Thank you. Good questions, everyone. Thank you, Kate. It's been an absolute pleasure. It really, really has. The recording will be up soon at some stage, everybody, as well. And I really want to thank everybody who's attended. I'll also be following up with a link to the little short survey that helps me keep these conversations going. He's desperately trying to put that into the form as well. But always a big pleasure, Kate. I've loved the conversation as well. We have our next episode sorted for next month, where I'm going to be joined by nonprofit leader and researcher Michelle Reynolds. Her research has highlighted something that many in the sector recognise but rarely really discuss openly, which is around what you've touched on there, Kate, the emotional labour of many working within the sector that often find themselves as fundraisers, leaders, or just general nonprofit staff that immerse themselves in the stories of that suffering and that need, but also they're whilst they're also sort of navigating the pressures of delivering impact raising funds and sustaining organizations and even just CEOs. There's a great article that Holly Ransom published online about leaders feeling lonely at the top and that emotional labor taking its toll as well. So there'll be more details on that. You'll be able to register to that as well too and sign up. It'll be happening on April the 30th. And of course, all of the other episodes so far are up on the YouTube channel as well. Rough and Ready YouTube channel that's there as well. Kate, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
My
Thanks
pleasure.
everybody for joining us today. I hope you really enjoyed that conversation as much as I did as well. Have a great day, and I look forward to the next one. Take care,
Thanks,
everybody.
everyone. Cheers.
Bye.